Yeah, it's a little after 7, so whoever joins us, we'll just welcome them into the group. So do you want to just kind of start it off, and then I'll say a few things?
Sure. My name is Eileen, and I'm the program coordinator for the Omega Center, which, as most of you probably know, is really actually a virtual center, a community, but not necessarily in a particular place. Not yet, anyway, maybe in the cards one day. And I actually am, I live in Victoria, BC, Canada. So we are definitely part of the virtual world at the Omega Center. So, and we have people here from Australia and a lot from the States, from Canada. I think somebody maybe even from Italy. So it's wonderful to have you all here. And this is our first time, so thank you for your patience. We work with the technology. We are recording it, so there will be a recording posted for the members. I'll send everybody an email with a link. And just thank you. If you haven't used Zoom before, you can mute yourself at the bottom. If there's background noise, I'll probably just mute people as well. So, but as much as you can, maybe keep yourself muted if you're not speaking, just to keep things quieter and we can hear Ilia better. So I think with that, I'd just love to hand this over to Ilia, and so nice to be able to introduce you all to her personally, personally.
Thanks, Eileen. Yeah, and thank you all for joining us here in this community. I really think this is the one of the great benefits of technology is what Teilhard called ushering in the noosphere, a new level of mind in which we're sort of electronically linked to one another, and I think that's what we're seeing this evening. Let me say a little bit about the Omega Center and sort of some of the underlying ideas behind it. The Omega Center, the term Omega does come from Teilhard de Chardin's writings, and there is a question about Omega here that I will get to in a few minutes. I think what we're aiming to do is come to a deeper understanding of how science and religion not only need to, but really must work together for the sake of a sustainable planet, for a more unified global human community. And Teilhard had broad visions. He himself was a Jesuit. He was a trained scientist, and also with a deep spirituality, I think. And he brought these things together in a very unique way. He did not write in systematic theological language, and his language is often, it can be poetic, it can be inspirational, and it's very hard for people to get their heads around what is this guy really saying here. But he was also deeply philosophical in some of his ideas, and because he didn't follow through in his ideas in an organized way, you have to kind of piece through these ideas which actually run throughout all his writings. So he writes in a way that he's always thinking almost like in a spiral rather than linearly. And so one of his key ideas is that, in the first one, I think, which is so fundamental to what we're about and really which lies at the heart of a lot of your questions, is the fact that we are in evolution. And that's not just saying that this is something that Darwin founded, but evolution for Teilhard meant that life, reality, is a dynamic process that, given enough time and the right conditions, will complexify, meaning that we will go from more simple relationships to more complex or deepened relationships. So the word relationality is really important to this vision. And that's something that's very consonant with what we're finding from, for example, physics today, that we do live, that matter, the material world, is really an intrinsically relational world. So Teilhard said at one point, he said, evolution is just not about biology. He said, every aspect of life must now conform itself to, in a sense, the framework of evolution or the principles of evolution. And that, I should also indicate that he was not really influenced by Darwin as he was influenced by the French philosopher Henri Bergson. And Bergson had this idea that there's a creative impulse at the heart of nature. That wasn't a faith statement, that was a philosophical statement. He's saying that there's something within nature that is more than nature. Teilhard took that moreness to be the presence of God. In other words, he married Bergson's insight with the Christian understanding of incarnation. And so what Teilhard has is the idea that there's a principle, and we can say a personal presence of wholeness within nature, and yet that itself is not part of nature. And as God, he's saying that this personal presence is also transcendent. It goes before, it's beyond. So it's that personal presence that's pulling nature towards something more, and at the same time empowering nature to become something new. And so this understanding of evolution as a creative process that is constantly moving towards more complex life or more unified life, and where creativity is at the heart of it. So creativity, relationality, and increasing wholeness are really part of his vision. These are very different categories than what, certainly those of us who grew up in a Christian tradition or a Catholic church, or, even any other faith tradition, whether it's Jewish or Islamic, all the monotheistic faiths are tied to ancient cosmologies. It's nothing bad or nothing good. It is simply the fact that they emerge at a particular epoch within human consciousness, and that many of them are still, when I say tied, I mean the structure of their frameworks and their structure of thinking are tied to a static, fixed type of framework. And Teilhard recognized that. He said it can no longer hold. And I think today, what we're seeing today is precisely this insight is coming true. It does no longer hold for religions to remain tied to fixed, static frameworks. And the difficulty is that all the doctrines of the monotheistic faiths are all based on these static ancient frameworks, because many of them follow not just Greek philosophy, but certainly as that Greek philosophy got passed into the Middle Ages. And this is true probably for, again, both Jewish, Islamic, and Christian doctrines. Aristotle is fundamental to these doctrines. And Teilhard really lamented the fact that we're so tied down and weighed down by Greek metaphysics. Again, this is not a critique of Greek metaphysics, which has its own beauty. He's just saying that Greek metaphysics no longer adequately explains reality as science now tells us about reality. So does that, is that familiar to you, or in a sense where at least a basic understanding of things? It's very basic, by the way. So when I get to your questions, in other words, why you have the questions you do, and we can entertain other questions you might have this evening as well. But you see, a lot of our interest and our concerns about the shape and the structure of the church, the sacramental life of the church, the Eucharistic presence within the church, these questions emerge out of implicit understandings that are philosophical and theological. And unless we come to a different philosophical understanding of things, we really can't address these questions adequately. And what we don't want to do is be superficial about these things. We don't want to, toss them out because they're irrelevant, but nor do we want to kind of come to this, a very light explanation of things. What we seek is a deepened explanation of the changes at hand and why some things that could be very valuable in a new way need a new understanding, and that's what we're after, a new understanding of things that can help, when I say shape our lives, in other words, our choices and the way we look at the world will also, take on a new gravitas. There's a saying I often use, and it's very simply this: when the level of our awareness changes, we start attracting a new reality. And I think that's where we find ourselves today, that our awareness of ourselves, of the world, of of the way life is much more, we call it fast-paced, but we can say it's dynamic. These awarenesses are really impelling us to a new reality. And we're trying to come to terms with what is the new reality. And so, again, I think part of the dilemma here, and which was so much at the heart of Teilhard's concern, is the two pillars of this reality are really science and religion. And this is nothing new. If you can go back right back to the ancient philosophers themselves were keen observers of the natural world. In fact, for the Greeks, to do philosophy was really to do science, quote unquote. They called it natural philosophy. But Aristotle and Plato all spoke about things of space. They were very concerned with the dimensions of space, with the question of time, with the question of being. So these are ancient concerns. But the difference is, for the ancient Greeks, well into the Middle Ages, natural philosophy and theology or religion formed a harmonious relationship. In other words, it was precisely the understanding of things that allowed the philosopher to reflect, to contemplate on what is being, what is the purpose of our lives, where are we going? And so there was a deep resonance between theology, or I'm going to use the word religion here, and science, right in and through the Middle Ages. Even the great Christian writers like Thomas Aquinas or Bonaventure, they had to take courses in astronomy and physics and mathematics before they studied the Bible. And it's unfortunate, but we have really divorced these two areas. And that great divorce, you might say, it is the great divorce, occurred after the High Middle Ages, when heliocentrism, or the discovery that the Earth is not the center of the Earth, the cosmos, and the sun is center, when heliocentrism emerged and Galileo supported that doctrine, the Catholic Church, began to retreat from natural philosophy, from modern science, and science itself began to take on a life of its own. And we've been living with this great divorce since the 16th century. And truthfully, we don't do well with divorces. It always leaves us partial, right? So it leaves us, and we're in tremendous need today, I think, of a new wholeness. And I think that's what we're feeling more than understanding. We feel the need, we feel fragmented. And I think this is a global feeling. I don't think this is a North American feeling. I think people are feeling disconnected around the world, for as much as we are connected through technology. So we can say it's not just about technology per se. There's something deep within us that is longing for a new unification, a new type of unity. And Teilhard was very keen about this, and he tried to approach the question first from the point of developing a philosophy of love, basically saying that as we look over evolution, consciousness is rising, and there's an unyielding force of attraction within nature. And so he spoke of love as that core energy that has both of attractive power and it has a level of consciousness to it. And, it's true. I mean, and no matter where you are throughout the world, love is a common language, and it's a common element that is unitive. I haven't yet met anyone, from a different religion or culture, even speaking a different language, for whom love did not have some type of unitive power. So I think Teilhard really was onto something very deep there. And he also said that love, in its unitive power, can draw us into a new type of what he called a cosmic personhood. In other words, it's like taking all that we are and linking it together into a new type of mind and heart. In other words, that the Earth can be, in his language, planetized, united. And again, I think we see elements of this certainly in economics, and just in terms of the fact that there's a flow in a type of global economy, certainly in terms of stocks and Wall Street. But we also see that even the news media, we feel we pray for, we are concerned about the events in the Middle East, in Africa, in those parts of the world where there's suffering or there's marginalization. So we can get the seeds that there is something about us that is changing, and it's yearning to have a greater force of cohesion to it. So, I think one of the questions we need to engage, and I can just open it up here, is what do we mean by bringing together science and religion? And that's a huge question. I was just with a group of scientists last week and some religion scholars, and it is both a plus and a minus that science has developed in very hyper-specialized ways. I was with plasma physicists and astronomers and ecologists, and we've learned to drill down in our knowledge so that we are really experts in one small thing, or one particular area. And that goes the same for the side of religion. We can drill down to particular areas within religious studies or theology. But we've lost the capacity to speak to one another in ways that we have something in common. And yet, when I listen to scientists and their emphasis on relationship in nature, their emphasis on systems, which is now more and more common among the various scientific disciplines, I'm thinking to myself, we do have common elements that we need to highlight, and we need to build those elements into a bond of unity between science and religion. Teilhard thought this. He thought science and religion are like two lenses of looking out the one world. And right now we're looking through two different ways. We're like, science is looking this way, and religion is looking this way, so to speak. And what Teilhard said is we have to put the glasses on so that they're both looking this way. And this way for him is toward the future. And that is what we share in common, as Teilhard emphasizes. It's not up and it's not horizontal, it's future. And that's I think one of the aspects of our paradigm. We're in a huge paradigm shift today. It's a massive paradigm shift. I really think that the way we think through our lives in this particular time will have significant consequences for the generations up ahead. So that's why it is important that we engage in this conversation together. And so, a lot of the work of the Omega Center is trying to find the common elements that can help form an integrated synthesis between science and religion. Not that we want to make science religion or religion science. We respect the distinct disciplines in their methods, in their language, but there are common elements that help us engage and understand the world in a more unified way. And I think that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to understand the world both in its natural capacity and in its infinite capacity, because this world, reality has a depth to it, that eludes the scientific grasp. So let me just pause there. And I know you've had questions, but let me allow you to ask your question, which will then enable me to answer it for the group. So let me open it up at this point to your questions.
So people can just unmute themselves and maybe chime in.
So if you want to just raise your question here, or I can read your question too if you want. What would you like to do?
John?
Yes.
John looks like he has a question.
Yes.
I do. I comprehend in reading your last book, you explain it very well. Also, in your recent email, you explain things very well. What I don't completely comprehend is the vision of where this is going, how it is going.
Right.
And what does it mean
Yes.
to the common person?
Yes, so that's a good question. What is the vision? Where is it going, and how is it going? Well, let's take what is the vision. And I think the vision is not too different than what the New Testament itself holds out for us. And that is what we have traditionally called the reign of God or the kingdom of God, which is a dynamic term. It's not a static term. So I think the first thing we need to get over is the fact that we're going to achieve something, like we're going to arrive at something. That's not actually, I think, what we're about. And I'm not sure Teilhard, although he lived in a different historical time period, I think what the vision is a, if you can imagine this, because we're so far from it, but a planet, in other words, a globe of a human community that is, in a sense, united in a certain level of respect, mutuality, cooperation, and compassion. In other words, that we can begin to engage difference through a power of love. And by love, I don't mean a sentiment or emotion, but a love. Love here means seeing the highest good, seeing the good in the other. And therefore, it's beginning to have a consciousness of that the self that you are and that I am can really not exist fully and cannot experience the flourishing of life without the other, who is my neighbor, whether it's my neighbor who's local or my neighbor who is living in Iran or Iraq. So it's coming to a deeper level of understanding what does it mean to be a human person, and what does it mean, what is the value of community in shaping personhood, and seeing and in that community of personhood the presence of a loving God, a God who is calling us into more life present in that community. So it's nothing different than what we've known, certainly in traditional religion, but it's bringing that traditional understanding of what we might call church or what we would call the reign of God, but bringing that now into a more enlivened and deepened and global understanding of life in evolution. Does that help, John, in a certain way?
It does help, and I appreciate your answer. I guess the next question, and I don't mean to take up everyone else's time, but the next question is, okay, so that's the vision. How do you accomplish that vision? And I know we're starting off here, and I've taken other courses. Otto Scharmer has a course at MIT on the theory U and trying to branch out in this global community effort.
Right.
So we have the vision, and again, I guess the big question to me in this world of dysfunction, how do we go about accomplishing this?
So it's a good question you have, John, and that's really our challenge. And let me tell you why it's a challenge. Because the answer to your question cannot be given too quickly. This is not in fact, in a certain way, there is no answer per se, if I can say it this way. It is a life, it is really a shift in our whole way of being and thinking. It's what we call, from a traditional religious perspective, a conversion. And really, the type of response here is we are being called to conversion in the radical turning of everything about us. In other words, understanding ourselves not as a static, fixed something, but as a process, as something that we ourselves are being created. And we don't think like this. This is part of the problem. So underneath this, I'm going to say this right off, we need to be constantly learning from the sciences about reality, about nature. And I think we can't just assume things, because science really is opening it to us very new understandings of what nature is about. And so coming from that understanding, one thing we can say is we are not just fixed static beings. The person you are today is different from the person you probably were with last week, and what different from what you'll be next week. Your thoughts are constantly changing. Perhaps as your thoughts change, you change. What I think we need is a turning in the way we see ourselves in relation to the world. In spirituality, we speak about conversion and transformation as a whole process of letting go, of discipline. In other words, we have to, in a sense, train ourselves for a new way of being. And I also think, to be quite honest, we have to empty ourselves out. We have a lot of stuff. We're like warehouses, and we put in those warehouses all the stuff that what we're angry about, what we can't stand, the people we can't stand, who we don't like and who doesn't talk to us. And we kind of put all that within us, and then we shut the door. And truthfully, the type of person that will, you might say, move into the future with a sense of life and who will be part of the emerging life will be a person who is interiorly free. And that's not a light statement. That is something that every person at this point must take responsibility for their lives, for their own interior life. And that requires a self-examination. In other words, it requires an honesty of self. Who am I? As many, of the ancient philosophers would say. And coming to grips with that question, who am I think can really, in an honest way, put us on, you might say, a path towards opening up to a new way of being in the world. So your question is a very good one, but it cannot be answered too quickly. And so I would hold that question as part of a conversion process, if I can put it that way.
I can, I don't know if there is an opportunity to see a chat and contribute to a chat, and Kevin has just said, isn't the conversion a metanoia, the putting on a new mind, the mind of Christ? And Judy says the mind of Christ equals mind of wholeness, unity, with a question.
Yes, I think part of certainly the New Testament from a Christian perspective is the call to conversion, right? That is the message of Jesus. Turn around. Like, I think, to paraphrase, Jesus is like, what are you doing? You have your heads in the sand, you're stuck, you keep holding on, to the past. And his thing is, if you want to stay with the dead in the past, you'll be dead, and he says you must, first of all, it's trust, wake up, be attentive, and to know that something new is happening in our midst. That's really what Jesus is about. And so I think, that notion, that term, to put on the mind of Christ, really is to really change our minds. In other words, it is really allowing ourselves to undergo a shift in consciousness. And I want to say that only God can invite us into a shift in consciousness, but only we can really respond. We have to make the choice. And that really runs through, by the way, both Old Testament and New Testament. God is saying, do you really want life? You can choose between life or death, but you must choose life. And I think that's part of the thing is we're kind of always wanting someone to show up and do it for us. We're always looking for a savior. But the whole point of Jesus is that his humanity is our humanity. So, what happened to Jesus is, in a sense, what our lives are about. And that means it's not all just, it's not going to happen by public policy. It's certainly not going to happen through any government decision. It's going to happen when we ourselves make a radical turn into freedom in our own lives. And so I think part of the conversion, and certainly what the New Testament is about, is a conversion into freedom. We are not free as persons. We are still bound by a lot of our growing pains, you might say, as persons. And I think freedom is knowing and trusting that we are not alone, that God is with us, that there is one other than myself, who's at the heart of myself and at the heart of this dynamic process of life, and who is inviting us into something new. Jesus trusted that presence of God. And I think today we are called to do so in a new way. And Eileen, what was the other question that,
So Kevin's, just somebody asking about the mind of Christ. Does that equal the mind of wholeness, unity? Is that how you, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, this term, the mind of Christ, this term comes out of a type of piety and devotionalism, which is fine. I mean, it worked, for many of the great saints and mystics. But I think really what we're talking about today is really assuming the values that Jesus had. The mind of Christ is in a sense to think like Jesus. In other words, to think out of a level of trust, to think out of a level of surrender, to think out of a place of freedom, to think out of a place of forgiveness, to think out of a place of peace, to think out of a place of compassion. That's the mind of Christ. There is no other mind of Christ. It's those values that, in a sense, shape our thinking to act in a particular way that is, in a sense, to act in a way that God becomes visible and present in our lives. So that we are not the dividers of the world, we then become part of the whole making of the world, because we ourselves are participating in that wholeness.
I just follow up. That was Judy who was asking about the mind of Christ and wholeness and unity.
Good question. Yeah. Lynn, did you have a question?
A little follow-up from Kevin, though, about just about the meditation. Aren't we called to be deep mystical observers? And how would you respond to that around the need for meditation?
Yeah, Lynn, we'll get to your question in a minute, okay? Just hold on there. That is really an important part of this. And what I see, the science and religion dialogue has been going for about 50 years, but it hasn't gone far. And I think the missing piece to bridging science and religion is the mystical dimension piece. Teilhard really was a mystic as well as a scientist and a spiritual writer. And it was the mystical dimension. In other words, unless we know God within and unify life within us, and that's what mysticism does, right? It pulls us into that presence of God within us. We, in a sense, begin to lean on and are supported by this deep interior presence of divine love. And that inner presence in which we dwell, whatever we're doing, that presence is there. It's out of that presence we begin to see and act with a sense of that presence in the other as well. So the inward journey is essential to the outward journey. If there is no wholeness within, and if there's no movement to wholeness within, which I think is what the mystical journey is about, there really can be no movement to wholeness without. And that's why I think it's not about having a public policy that's going to limit something, or it's not about, restricting something. That wholeness is a dynamic wholeness. And there's two things. We either make whole by the way we live our lives, or we actually fragment that wholeness. We are the destroyers of wholeness. But we are on one side or the other. We don't have a neutral territory. And that's why the mystical dimension is fundamental to the forward movement of life, especially in the 21st century. Karl Rahner said the Christian of the future will be a mystic or will cease to exist at all. And I think he was right on. Lynn?
Yeah. I'm loving every minute of this, but I've had a glimpse of that whole, to go back to that original vision that we're talking about and John was asking about. I've had a glimpse of that. I have a centering prayer practice that is giving me a solidity and strength that I never had before. But I guess my question is, now what? I live in a place where nobody knows what on earth I'm talking about.
Yes.
My daughter, she understands me sort of.
Yes.
I don't know what to do.
Yes, sure, Lynn. And that is part of the challenge today, isn't it? Because we are living, again, as we gather in this community here online, I think we're here because we have, even if it's our questions, there's something about our understanding that's changing. And so we do find ourselves today, you might say, at slightly different levels of evolution. And I think one thing what I realize is that not everyone is evolving at the same rate.
Right.
And it's something we just assume. Like, I see this, how come you don't see this, And therefore, we are really called today to, I would say, to a new type of practice of virtues where we do have to be, several things. We do have to be patient with those who are not where we are seeing things, right? I think we have to be respectful of those wherever they're coming from, even if it's a fundamental position. My task is not to disrupt anyone's life. And let me say this, religion, when it comes to things of religion or faith or that which tethers us, these are what ground persons. So you don't want to be like an earthquake or a tsunami, and say, oh, that's ridiculous. How could you possibly ever, think like a 13th century person? I would say be respectful, be compassionate, but at the same time, you do have to find a community, right? To be able to share, your questions, your searching. And part of the Omega Center really has that aim, even electronically, that we can begin to realize that we are not alone in this journey, that they're right here in this small forum. We represent half the world. I mean, Australia, Canada, North America, we need a few from Europe and Africa. But, what I do hope the Omega Center will begin to do is do this around the 7 continents. My hope is that we can planetize, that we can take this vision to every part of the world, that no one is left out of the invitation to a new future of global and planetary life. So to answer your short-term question, what do? I would say this, Lynn, there's got to be at least one other person you can share, I would say take a book. It doesn't have to be my book. It could be like Jack Hott's book or someone's book in which these ideas are being expressed, and come together with them, maybe invite 1 or 2 people. And, all right, that was just a little, that might have a commercial break here,
Yeah.
We probably should. Anyway, going back, so I would just say, it's good these ideas are so big and they're so engaging. They're very hard to engage alone. And I think part of the difficulty is the question, sort of like what John, well, how do I think about this? What do I do? How do I, what kind of decisions do I make? And I'm going to suggest, and this is so in tune with what this vision is about, you need to create even just a local community. Invite 1 or 2 friends in, say, hey, would you like to share this book with me? And just take like a chapter, a week, a month, whatever your time can, afford, and begin a conversation. It's about dialogue, right? This is not an individual thing. It's about sharing, communication. And so I think we need to begin to share, all right, how we're thinking and what we're experiencing with others. So you have a number of other concerns here, but can I still open it up to your questions, or do you want me to use the questions that I have here? Anyone else?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Kevin. Oh, yes.
Ilia,
Yes.
this is Bill.
Oh, hi, Bill.
Not that I want to other the people in Washington.
No.
However,
Yes.
I see a tremendous lack of love, not in all cases.
Oh, believe me, Bill, you are not alone.
Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes it feels overwhelming.
Yes.
And I'm one of the first-year graduates of the Living School.
Okay.
And so many of us appreciated what you were talking about synchronicity and quantum entanglement.
Mm-hmm.
And I see a lot of that going on too.
Yes.
But
Mm-hmm.
I'm very fortunate to be part of a small Methodist church plant. That's a lot of what you're talking about. The pastor is very open to all this.
Yeah.
So I can do it on a small scale. But how do we affect more people who don't clue, even if they knew who Teilhard de Chardin was.
Yes.
They have a hard time understanding him.
Yes, I understand. So I think several things, Bill. I think we need to remain committed to, in other words, what we're involved in is so much more than ourselves. I think that's the first thing we really have to be attentive to. Second is, it is important that we remain open to working together. In other words, sharing and understanding together a quantum entanglement, so to speak. And I think, third, I do think that level of interiority, the level of centering, the level of meditation, the level of realizing that we cannot solve the problems of the present simply by a type of political action alone. I do think developing a field of consciousness could be one of the most important things we do today. Now, when I was in Maryknoll in May, someone told me that in Germany, while the Berlin Wall was still up, a group of committed people gathered every day by the wall in silent prayer. They just sat in silence, in silent meditation. And she was saying that just focusing, in other words, focusing their minds and their hearts on the removal of that wall, she felt really had an impact on the eventual removal of the Berlin Wall. So one thing I want to say is we always want to jump to action, when in fact I think our greatest power is in the presence of mind, in the presence of consciousness. This is not to say that we shouldn't act, believe me. But what happens is, I think, even especially given our political culture and climate today, we're thinned out because we exhaust our energies in the feeling of helplessness. Believe me, the current decisions of our present government are so contrary to my own position on things. I mean, it's just hard to really get your head around how we can continue like this. But I want to say this, nothing will continue like this. We are in an unfinished universe. Things will change. We need to stay committed to what we hold true and to that belief that God is at the heart of this. Because sometimes we act, as if God just took a station break, or we act as if God is no longer part of the whole mix. And I think we cannot lose sight that God is at the heart of the whole mix, and that God continues to invite us into a new level of heart and mind. I also want to say this, and I think it probably needs to be said more explicitly. Things will not get better before they will get worse. Now, I know that sounds harsh, but there is something to suffering. In other words, the path through to a higher level of consciousness and a higher level of unity must pass through a level of suffering. And that, in a sense, is the cruciform nature of nature. That's not just on the human level. All of nature has passed through levels of profound suffering to get to where we are, in a sense, today, even as more complex human species or human persons. I do see in our own time, my own anticipation is that we will undergo a type of profound suffering. And I think we're not even prepared for that. I think we have gotten used to being exempt from suffering. Other parts of the world suffer, but we in the Western Hemisphere, in the Northern Hemisphere, have been somewhat exempt from it. And we act as if we should be always exempt from it. I don't think that that's the case. I do think we should, and that's why it is important how we live interiorly. Because many of the great mystics and the great people who have gone before us, and here I would include Gandhi and Martin Luther King and the great people who have forged new paths, they did undergo profound suffering. And I think what we're going to see in our own time is not persons who suffer. We're going to see collectives who suffer. And our question is this: are we ready really to suffer through to a greater love? Because that, in a sense, is the test of a higher love. Can you persevere? Do you trust what your beliefs sufficiently that you will hold on and continue to allow yourself to be drawn by God into something new? So again, your concerns are great. I'm totally with your concerns. I just don't think we can have a superficial or a quick answer to them. These are very deep problems. I do think today the type of problems that we're experiencing politically reflect to me the deep resistances to evolution itself, and by evolution I mean the deep resistance to the breakdown of patriarchy. That's not a criticism. It is simply that most of our systems, especially Western systems, are patriarchal. They're structured along linear top-down thinking. They no longer hold, and I think we're seeing a great resistance to what can no longer hold. And therefore, I anticipate things will first fall apart really on a much larger scale than what they are now before they actually will find a new unity on a different level.
Thank you.
Yeah. There were some questions, if I can just put this, about the sacraments and the Eucharist. Did anyone submit those questions about the sacramental life or Eucharist?
I sent those to you by email, Ilia.
Who's that?
Barbara.
Barbara.
The one that goofed things up.
Oh, there you are, the one we can't see. Okay.
That was what I was trying to do.
Oh, I see. Well, again, Barbara, it's a good question. About your question is, for example, the Eucharist, as in Catholic theology, which the whole thing about the adoration of the sacrament is really based on a particular philosophical understanding of matter and form. But there's something to say that. Let me say two things. One, I think the sacramental life is a rich contribution to the sacredness of all life. There is a real value to the sacramentality of life, and what I would kind of move us from, and I think this is where a lot of contemporary spirituality would be going anyway, is that we're not focused on Jesus, who's locked up in a pyx or in a tabernacle. I think in a sense that presence there, if we hold belief in that presence, is to have a consciousness that presence sacramentalizes or signifies that presence in all of life. So, I think in the past we had this kind of Eucharistic piety or Eucharistic devotion where it became the me and Jesus thing, just me and Jesus, get out of my way type thing. Where the whole point of that is that if I can see Jesus here in this, in this humble piece of bread, then I can see Jesus in my neighbor, in the person who suffers, in the person who's the immigrant, and in every aspect of life. So I am all for sacramentality, but the whole point of sacramentality is that it raises a consciousness in our awareness that life is sacred because God, Jesus, is present. God is incarnate. Divine love is incarnate here, now, in this person, in this way, in this living reality. So
that goes with what I was saying, because we have always seen the sacraments as the Spirit coming from outside to me. And I'm thinking that can't be, because God's Spirit, love, is the ground of our being.
Exactly, Barbara. And
so
good term,
me,
by the way.
It is a growing of my realization of reality. And
Well
you're
said.
extending it there to entire universal reality. I hadn't gone that far.
Yes, exactly. Right. Yes. So, again, you point out the Spirit coming. God only knows how. We got into a very kind of almost a dualistic type of thinking, that God is an external other, and somehow, like Superman, comes in and does God's thing. And And oh my goodness, that is so not actually what the whole doctrine of creation is about. Is the whole beauty of God is the beauty of the simplicity of unity and wholeness. The Creator and the creation are unified in that embrace of God's love. You know, that God is not outside, but God is more than, right? God is God, right? And we're not God, by the way. And so that the beauty is that God, who is so completely other and more than what we are, is really present to us. You know, and that's such a fantastic mystery. What the medievals call the mystery of opposites, or the coincidence of opposites. That God, who is so other than, is so, you know, intimately present too. And we can never grasp that God, you know, as a mystery of, because it's a mystery of opposites. And so our finite minds, what we do is we are always lured, we're always pulled toward that God, and that God is always coming to us. But as God comes to us, that mystery of God is always receding from us as well. We never can grasp God, you know. The horizon always recedes, and it is what underlies the dynamism of our journey of life. We are always, in a sense, being pulled into that mystery evermore.
Thanks.
Let's see. We got to the science and religion. We had touched a little bit on John's concern on the Omega. We did not address Trump's energy agenda, but again, I think if you can appreciate, you know, we're not going to solve these political problems, as we talked about with Bill, you know, too quickly. You know, we can certainly keep a conscious awareness of what needs to be resisted, but, and I think a prayerful consciousness of the power of bringing heart and mind together for a type of resistance. But I also think that what we hope for will not happen too soon, if I can just put it this way. Is there anything else that you'd like? Is there any burning question here?
I'm just wondering, we've only got a few minutes left, if anybody has something they'd like to take this opportunity.
Any, like, I haven't a clue what you're talking about type thing, or?
Ilia, I absolutely love what you say. You know, it's so positive and uplifting. And I do believe what you're saying, contemplation has got to be part of what we all need to be. That's what the mystics did, and that's how they discovered it. Francis knew and saw God in all of life.
Right.
And I think we got to move in that kind of direction.
Thanks, Marian. I think that's right. And just to kind of underscore that, contemplation, both as a practice, but contemplation as a way of life. That's really what we're talking about. Not just the practice alone, but contemplation as a way of being in the world. So that wherever we are, whether we're in the mall, whether we're on, you know, the Smithsonian marching against something, whether we're at our jobs, you know, that we are actually living and moving with a contemplative space where God is dwelling in that space with us. So that we're always then thinking out of a different sense, not just I think a lot of our problem today is we have sort of disconnected our right brain, so to speak. You know, we're not acting out of a deeper center. We're acting out of an analytical, strategic, almost survival, you know, mode center of the brain. And contemplation is saying, no, there's something deeper within us already, and we need to widen that deepened presence, and we need then to begin to live our lives out of that deepened presence. Or as the ancients would say, the mind must stand in the heart, and the heart stands in God, who stands within me. You know, and therefore, you know, we have that new center. All right. So is there any other burning question before we might wrap this up this evening? How did this work for you? Can I ask how it worked?
Well, I want to say, I don't have a burning question, but I do have a real appreciation for the opportunity to just sort of sit and ask questions and share ideas.
Great.
You know, I wrote in the chat that I haven't found anybody yet to be able to talk about this with.
Yeah.
And would understand what the heck I'm saying when I try to explain
Oh,
it.
like Lynn. Mm-hmm.
Right. Yes. I really related to what Lynn had to say. So this was a nice opportunity to even be in the presence of other people who are asking the same questions.
Yeah. Thanks, Judy. Yeah, I think that's really important. Again, we're coming from different, but there's a common concern here for a deep understanding, because there's an authentic search for life, and for the fullness of life, and that's what we're called. We're called to the fullness of life, and it's hard for us to get. Sometimes we're like, fullness of life, really? I mean, we can, and yet that is actually what. That potential for the fecundity of life is in our midst. It is not an elusive term. So thanks for sharing that.
Will this tape be available to us of this
Yes.
conversation?
Yes. Eileen has recorded the conversation, and we will download it on the Omega website.
Mhm.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm in Florida, if anybody is from Florida.
Yes, there was someone else from Florida here.
I'm in Tampa, Florida.
Tampa. Where are you, Bill? What part?
I'm about a half an hour north of Orlando, in DeLand.
All right. Well, you Florida folks, you might get yourselves together there. And,
Pompano Beach, Florida.
there you go. You can form an Omega group. So we'd like to form Omega groups, wherever you are.
And even virtual groups. I mean, that's something we'll be looking at more. And we've all experienced it today. How can we be connected even if we're, dispersed around the globe? And I think we'll be considering ways to keep people connected. Those who want to, maybe, consenting to having their email address available to others, that sort of thing. Yes.
Sure. So it's about trusting and forming a community of trust and shared values and vision. As someone once said, love isn't looking at one another, it's looking together in the same direction. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really the type of love that we want to nurture and deepen here. Yeah. So if there's nothing else, then I'm going to say good evening or good morning to Australia. And we hope to do this at least once a month. It's easy enough to do. And so keep posting, keep tuned to the Omega website, and please write into us and tell us how you're doing. Okay. Yeah.
And thank you for
abundant blessings and peace.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ilia.
Okay.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Bye-bye.
Absolutely.